Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have you enjoyed your lunch? So this is midterm period. So I expect you're probably squeezing to respond to your using questions. Prepared well to obtain good grade. I hope you will be satisfied and obtain a satisfactory result in the final exam or so. As you have been introduced, this class waives the research waives the midterm exam. Instead, I posted information about the research requirement. So you go that way instead midterm exam. In this class, we explore legal actors in England. What are legal actors? What do you imagine with the words legal actors? You may surmise some scope of a judicial post, judges, prosecution officers, attorneys, law practitioners, and which is not same in English context. You'll be introduced the two divisions of profession, what we call solicitors and barristers. Actually, we have a refined structure of a judicature, which is prescribed by Constitution and other pertinent laws. But how do you perceive if legal actors are important? Actually, the institutions also work to operate to produce a great result in terms of a justice, a social justice, and a justice business also based on the set of a dynamism and interaction about with the political branches and other judicial vehicles within its own domain also matter to shape a good paradigm about a judicial business. But actually, actors are important to say who practically engineers the virtue and a sense of justice through their execution of a duty. Their performance is actually expression of justice in some specific society. So I suppose they are really important, deserve a strict scrutiny, and also that is the subject we will take a journey through a 2 hours class. So the topic was divided into 4 sections: a legal education, a legal professions, and a judiciary. And of course, I will make a brief comment about the general points of consideration in the introductory section. Legal education is important to breed judicial posts and practicing attorneys. Basically, you can well see there are 2 distinct traditions within the current global jurisdiction. The legal education may arise from the context of a scholar-made law. So in that system, the university teaching is important and constitutes a pillar of instrumentality to breed a lawyers. We can imagine a judge-made law, which can be available massively in a context of Anglo-Saxon judicial system, particularly judge-made law practice is notable in the jurisdiction of the United States. Of course, the British tradition also can be classed into that category, but there is some point of distinction. For example, is the case method like in America? Usually, the British legal education involves some kind of a philosophical or a ways of indoctrination based on traditional virtue and a Greek tradition, kind of. So that is, and a social science tradition heavily inform the judicial education, which is particularly distinguishable from the context of the United States. So they usually do not use the case book, unlike the American students. They rather been introduced into kind of a textbook, which contains a principle of laws and some basic summaries about legal rules developed by judiciary through the long centuries. This tradition is also concerned about the current practice of international legal scholars. For example, you may come across the word republics of scholar, or what the word it connotes. That means some distinct practice to formulate the international laws. You may see the unilateral principle, for example, which is basic document of non-state norm nature. So we cannot call it exactly the hard law. It just includes the principles of a private law, massively dealing with the contract theory, and that is produced by the circle of scholars. So scholar is not absolutely a state authority to create norms. They have no authority to make the laws in the context of a state power, but they formulate the rules which is useful to guide the basic themes and principles of a private law. So the scope of application is rather limited, unlike the traditional character of international laws, but they are useful. And one way of approach to address the delicacies and the hard nature of a formulation of international law. So the scholar-made law is usually frequented and most prevailing in the context of a European continental states, which is in contrast with a common law system. And also, you may be sanguine and some feel of a irrationalities, perhaps, but very strongly rooted in a long history of British politics. So the legal professions have split between the groups of solicitors and barristers. So solicitors are led by law of society, which is entertain a principal authority to dominate this group of solicitors, and they provide a guidance and professional rules to regulate the group of solicitors. And barristers have a distinct role and principally responsible to the justice administration in England, and it is led by Bar Council, which is very powerful to shape the destiny of legal professions in Great Britain. So the interaction, and in some context, an extent of conflict that may arise in the context of provision of legal service in Great Britain. Actually, their role and scope of responsibility differ, and their career path is also distinguishable. If solicitors may not elected to higher judicial posts, actually, and they historically are not qualified to take official post as a judicial officer. But recently, the rule has changed to see some of solicitors in the lower judicial post. And barristers are usually more responsible to judicial inquiry in the context of overall state administration, and they some of them would advance to high judicial posts. For example, High Court. Most of High Court judges are staffed with senior barristers. Usually, in Great Britain, the use of judges are seldom, very unusual, and most judges are over the age of 40. So they are very esteemed and considered prestigious to be ensured of their lifetime tenure usually, and their resignation is so unusual. So it implies that he or she may quit their job on some extreme ground, which is unexpected normally. And the reform has been launched extensively over a legal education and legal profession, as we discussed through the class. So in the domain of legal professions, there is a tendency of a extended fusion, which is extent of fusion, which is not dominant but very positive over two divisions. Through the journey of explanation, we expect to have lessons from the article titled Royal Commission of Legal Services, which is useful in terms of its essences presented. So the point of a consideration will range over the attitudes of profession and the main criticism and efficiency, selection of judges, and we'll have a brief summary. And the article titled Law and Society in England also the 1980 have allowed us to have some brief grasp of a solicitors. The context of solicitors would be revealed in its essential point. And so, if available, we'll look into briefly the judiciary in England. So I prepared a picture the facade of a Oxford University. As I've said, the university teaching of law is seldom practiced in Great Britain. Most feature of legal education was performed by Inns of Court and grey inns or some other context of vocational training influence so much, and a dominant force to breed lawyers. But the trend has slowly progressed. Now most barristers have a law degree obtained in a university context. It is as late as mid-19th centuries that the universities of England conferred a law degree through the education of a university. A select committee organized in 1837 suggests that England came so lagged behind against the European states and United States. So some form of a formal university education is necessary to boost the legal system and also a legal education. So the first law degree was conferred by the University of London. And actually, the curriculum was not intrigued or developed in refined manner until a 17th century. English educators usually see the university is not a proper place to offer a legal education. So studies on letters and science popularized in medieval universities in England, but unlike the continental states, they do not offer a legal education in formal ways of a curriculum. It is as late as 18th century when Blackstone began his lecture, very famous in Oxford University. And as you know, Blackstone is a prominent figure in terms of a common law legal system, which also powerfully influenced the shapings of a new republic in the United States. Also, you're advised to have reminiscence about a previous lecture. You can see the feature of one barista who is rough and cumbrous wigs. So the fashion differs between a group of solistas and a baristas. And so, in understanding the British legal actors, you are also advised to have some thoughts about a history and legal history and tradition. So, we still may well call them a kind of a medieval republic oligarchy, which is a term to denote the group of baristas and the conservative ethos through the legal education and legal profession. So as you will see later, the ways of legal education is important to understand the culture and system of law. So we can see three major patterns among the groups of civilized countries. For example, in Paris in Germany, they manage some 4 or 5 years undergraduate education for prospective lawyers, and they later obtain some position to enter a national center of legal education for the purpose of a practical training, which is usually 1-year course, and that system approximated the Korean one, usually, which has recently been reformed. It modeled after the U.S. modality. And one another, the distinct preserve may be found in a English context, as I've introduced. So the professional training is so esoteric and very distinctive to make a point against other practices of legal education. And of course, one other ways to breed lawyers was found in the United States context, which is framed in the ways of graduate education. So how do you perceive such differing ways about legal education? 3 years baccalaureate is sufficient to make them integral and some loyalty to the state and justice of society. How do you agree? Is it more required for reading laws or other a professional apprentice? So actually, the judicial post, the main attribute required to respond to the needs of a judicial post would lie in basic knowledge of law, as well as conscience and some personal integrity, loyalty, a fidelity, or a sense of balance, a deep understanding of history of society. And so actually a scope of elements intervene to question whether the legal education is proper or not. So, as I've said, there is always a curiosity about how other people live and what they do. It fills books and popular magazines. It has captured the special name, biography, and become of such interest that we even appear directly into private lives by authors, discussions of their own lives, autobiography. As actors in a very special profession, when having only recently crossed the law school threshold, or nearing the end of a lifetime career, knowing how our counterparts function in other legal systems takes on an added meaning. We may become better at our own tasks, and we should have more compassion and tolerance for our foreign colleagues. The civil law lottery is only one example. We also will see that even though the socialist legal systems have very different philosophical underpinnings which affect the roles of legal actors, there are some similarities to which we can relate. Lawyers to become private practitioners in those nations, though one may have to broaden the definition of private if discussing the USSR. The cast of characters in the common law includes some who do not differ markedly from those in civil law systems. There are practitioners who represent parties. There are persons who decide disputes, and there are those who train these persons to take their roles. But who these people are and how they carry out those basic roles of profession differ not only from their counterparts in civil law systems, but differ within the common law tradition from system to system. What I call them and what they are assigned to do in the system: barristers assigned to represent clients at certain stages of proceeding, magistrates assigned to settle criminal matters of less importance, are less significant to the comparison than how they undertake their roles, how they are perceived by the public, and what tensions exist between them as they exercise their roles, and others who review the acts from the sole measures of the effectiveness in the midst of justice. The English legal profession is philosophically a closed shop. So that is very useful to truncate into the context of English legal actors. Though Sampson noted the old conservatism and exclusiveness of all institutions is to be found in the legal profession, which has grown up alongside the old universities as part of the classic route to empowerment and political power, with its roots deep in history and religion. The great Gothic structure of authority, as John Mortimer calls it, with its stone buttresses of power and its ancient ecclesiastical ornaments. The law is the most extreme British example of a closed and self-regulating community with all its strengths and weaknesses. Its proud traditions can enable judges to stand apart from the state apparatus as the ultimate guarantors of human liberties. But they have also enabled lawyers to resist reforms more stubbornly than anyone, and to fortify their own privileges. Right-wing lawyers love to complain about the monopolies and restrictive practices of trade unions, while they enjoy the most restrictive monopoly of all, protected by one of the oldest trade unions. We should know, through our years of education in the United States, of a few of the romanticized characteristics of some of the English actors. We recall Dickens' descriptions of Chancery in Bleak House. We have read of or seen photographs or paintings depicting the rough and wicked judges and barristers. Only our judges in the United States wear loves, and wigs are found nowhere among the tools of trade. So the fashion is same as Korea. This superficial distinction cannot be overlooked. The garments of office play a function in the rituals and machinery of justice. But we all go much deeper, from the form and substance of legal education to the division of tasks between specialists to the existence of actors scarcely found in the United States. The English system is a startling contrast to our way of allocating roles to legal actors. That should be apparent as we begin where we must begin, in the education to practice law. So, as professions evolve over long periods of time, the preparation stage for the profession tends to shift from on-site or apprentice training conducted by those actively functioning as practitioners to institutions created for or adapted to the purpose of training. Those institutions may be under close scrutiny of the profession. Indeed, they may exist as organizations of the profession, or they may be complete disassociated and often multidisciplinary institutions. The university serves the latter role. The Bar and Law Society operated schools and Inns of Court the former. If the roles coexist in both types of institutions, tensions are certain to evolve over role allocation. The evolutionary shift of the educational role may be from apprenticeship directed to the university without the establishment of a bar-operated training site. This has been the experience in the United States. Law was for many decades learned in a law office under supervision of practitioners. So, for example, this practice can be found until mid of a 19th century in the United States. For example, Lincoln, who is a lawyer in the United States, have not completed a formal education. The formal education of law was not available. Apprenticeship is only way to become a lawyer context. So the tradition shares both attributes in the same way. The development of law faculties in universities provided an alternative. They became attractive to students who could afford the cost of university education. They were likely to receive a more predictable offering of training. It was further attractive to the practitioner who may have lost a poorly paid assistant, but who no longer had to spend so much valuable time in conducting the prospective lawyer's professional education. The shift from learning in a lawyer's office to the university has evolved much more slowly in England, and it involved a unique institution, the Inns of Court. So, you now see the symbol of Inns Court placed in the front gate of the campus. For those, a courtyard, or I'm not sure, for those who seek to become a courtroom advocates, the inns have been and continue to be the single most important focus of one's attention. The law student in the United States concentrates on passing through the concentrated confines of university and law school training, culminated by passing a bar examination. He is then thrust into a wide expanse of geographic choice and life of contract with a considerable variety of people. There may be a similar pattern for the English law student who chooses to become a solicitor, but with a smaller territory in which to settle. But for the prospective advocate, the barrister, the culmination of his education and the call to the bar thrusts him not outward, but into the cloistered atmosphere of the Inns of Court. His contact thenceforth is limited largely to his clerk, solicitors, and before the bench, the judges for some years before pursue the same confined existence. So the mid-career barristers usually favor the position in Queen's Bench, which is a typical niche to promote to the higher post. Change the judges who some years before pursue the same confined existence. So change is evolving slowly. Barristers now more frequently than before appear before non-professional courts and before lawyer-level professional courts, onto the bench of which the solicitors have slowly edged their way. The study of law in the English universities developed as an academic discipline, much as one would study Greek history or English literature. Lawyers learn the common law in the course. A qualification to practice law in England, either as a barrister or solicitor, has never required a university legal education. So it is not mandatory. Actually, most jurors in England now possess the academic degree of law, but that is not mandatory. So for some sections, jurors may be found without an academic degree. Although a law procured increases the path selected by those intending a legal career, the decision to become a barrister or solicitor may not be both in England, frequently postponed until university graduation. Personal economics may be the deciding factor. Becoming a barrister remains more costly, but the large amount of criminal work paid for by the government offers barristers hope of modest early remuneration. So it is a concern of a personal economics. So in shaping the system of legal education, it is one factor to be considered, how to subsidize the costly tuition, or in some cases some sacrifice of other alternative need to be considered in personal context, also in the context of a public policy dimension. The non-citizen pays even more dearly for his training through high fees charged foreign students, although admission as a barrister or solicitor has no direct nationality prescriptions. The separation of solicitors and barristers evolved during the first 2 centuries after conquest. Persons appeared before the new common law courts were often assisted by one of a number of attorneys and advocates who spent their days milling about at the court. The attorneys or advocates initially was associated with the church, which is a dominant law in many areas of law. But as church power waned, the advisors primarily were laymen. Surgeons and barristers carved out their niche as courtroom advocates, assisting preparing the litigation by attorneys, or in the Court of Chancery, solicitors. So this is a personal intimacy and some interactive nature of education is favored through the course of a legal education. That is also embedded in practice of a career. So it is one of a essential requirement to report in the interaction with the law firms and legal officers. It is a prerequisite to sit for the bar exam, as I know. So senior lawyers are important to breed adequately the quality and a competence of a prospective attorneys. So you have the class for experience of practice in the context of a legal apprentice to be in law firms or legal offices in Korea. The distinction between attorneys and solicitors and the position of surgeon were later abolished. The separation of the barristers and solicitors, however, has been carefully preserved. It was reinforced by a Royal Commission study in 1979, although there remains tension between the positions. The education of both barristers and solicitors began as on-the-job training. The division between barristers and solicitors and the governance by different organizations, the Inns Code and the Law Society, respectively, are reflected in the educational process for each law. University teaching of law was for a long period unrelated to legal practice. Courses in civil law, principal Roman law were part of general university educational offerings. They were academic and theoretical rather than professional courses. The common law as an academic study was introduced to universities quite late. Blackstone lectured on common law at Oxford in the mid-18th century as the first Vinerian professor. A chair was established at Cambridge, and English law courses were introduced in University College and King's College in London. There was no rush to enroll. The number of students studying law in universities increased slowly. Training for legal service, contrary to the continental custom, continued to be governed by the profession, not the universities. A modest impetus to the evolution of university law teaching was generated by a study on legal education in 1846 and the subsequent establishment of law degrees at Oxford and Cambridge in the 1850s, followed 20 years later by the creation of law faculties. Law as an academic discipline in England evolved long after it had been formally established on the continent. Arnius gave his first lectures on Justinian's Digest at Bologna in the 11th century, when legal studies were becoming both systematic and scientific. Substantive and procedural training is required of those who aspire to be a barrister or a solicitor. There is some similarity in the training. An aspirant may follow the same path until the final vocational stages. Unique to the English system, however, is the diversity of allowable initial preparation. A strongly coveted premise holds that these professions should admit mature individuals from a variety of backgrounds and educational experiences. Inquiry into the status of legal education has occurred near the middle of both the last and this century. No major change have ensued, but the system has undergone a continuous evolutionary process. Few legal actors now believe that one should enter the practice of law either as a barrister or a solicitor without first studying law at a university or polytechnic. A significant majority of recently qualifying barristers and solicitors possess law degrees, as I've said. But unlike the practice in the United States and many other countries, the professions have not adopted this requirement as a mandatory qualification. The training of barristers in the Inns Code and of solicitors through articles has such strong historical roots that the shift of training of members of the legal profession from close control of the profession to the universities has come very slowly. Suggestions that the vocational stage of training be provided by the universities and polytechnics rather than by the profession was approved by a majority of the on-road committee, but opposed by a minority of committee which represent the profession. They prevailed. So vocational training for both baristas and solicitors remains outside of scope of universities and under control of the professions. But there is some encroachment on the training of the vocational stage for solicitors, since several polytechnics of the course leading to the final exam for prospective solicitors. The quality of the instruction in this course has long been criticized. A select committee in 1846 concluded that there was no adequate legal education available in England, and that what was available was considerably inferior to that in the more civilized states of Europe and America. It was this reform that stirred Oxford and Cambridge to establish law degrees, and later led to the creation of additional law faculties, first at the University of London and later in several of the provincial universities. But English law was taught much as was Roman law, as a liberal arts course with an emphasis on jurisprudence. Those prospective baristas and solicitors who did attend the university tend to favor reading the classics or some other subject than law. Schools were not financially well endowed, and most young men interested in legal careers went directly into Inns of Court or solicitors' offices as articled clerks. So they're usually exposed to a study of Greek philosophy and the ways of thinking and approach of in terms of intelligence would perhaps be different. So that is one element to allow a point of distinction between the traditions. So there was thus both lack of interest on the part of prospective members of profession. So they usually unable to complete the university course, and that is part of reason that the law was an appropriate part, was not an appropriate part of the university curriculum. So that factors to shape a distinct feature of a legal education, but the social progress would also influence, not radically, but on a static ground, which would be a slow course. So now we have some comment from Hatchell, which is titled "The Bowen Trial." So lack of payment for his work is not the only indignity a pupil has to suffer. In many other little ways, he is made to feel unwanted, a transient, a second-class citizen. In a number of chambers, pupils are not allowed to use telephone, nor can there be a telephone. The clerks are told not to take calls for pupils. In one set of chambers where I was a pupil, we were not even allowed to share in the chamber supply of tea and coffee. So to feel a close context of Inns of Court, or if pupils were paid, the whole status would change, and all these little pinpricks should cease. Of course, it will be argued the chamber simply cease to offer pupils if pupils cost money. But they have to recruit from somewhere, and I suspect that quite quickly the chambers would be competing with each other for the best pupils, the same way the city forms of solicitors compete for article clerks today. A more substantial objection is the argument that pupils would be far harder to find, because chamber would be looking for value for their money. However, this might not be such a bad thing. The effect would simply be to force out at an earlier stage those who are unlikely to succeed later anyway. And in the long run, this must be kinder to them. It is true that some baristas, for the noblest of reasons, feel very strongly that all students who hope to practice should have the chance to do pupillage. But the numbers of those currently embarking on pupillage so far exceed numbers of those who can hope to enter practice that some chambers are already deliberately trying to cut down on the number of pupils they take in. They have no room for them afterwards and feel that it is dishonest to offer a pupillage to people who have no prospect of a practicing. This polish may appear harsh, but I think myself that is right. Not only is a great deal of individual misery avoided, but a considerable body of highly skilled people is put to better use. It is pointless wasting the time of pupils, training them for a profession in which they will not be able to remain. However, whether a given individual will be able to find a tenancy depends so much at the moment on his being in the right place at the right time that one can sympathize with those who feel that everyone should at least have a chance to draw a ticket in the lottery. So I have some notes of questions available to you for the meditation about the English legal education. As is true in civil law systems and social law systems, legal education in England and most common law nations is undergraduate training. The degrees differ. Some institutions offer BA in law, others an LLB. Do you believe you'd receive an adequate training to practice law, or to be an undergraduate offering, perhaps followed by a year of vocational study, a bar exam, and a brief apprenticeship or pupillage? Does the English system do a better job of allocating the academic and vocational studies of legal education? Should they be segregated at all? Casebooks such as those we use in the United States are not in common use in English legal education, though in recent years a few have been written. Why did the case method develop in the United States rather than England? It may seem ironical that there is an increasing use of casebook collections in England. At the time, criticism of the case method seems quite extensive in the United States. Does the goal of legal education in England differ to the extent the casebooks would even more as useful as a teaching tool there? So that might be the context of a history in development of each nation. For example, the new colonists in United States may hurry to make their business on various context of events, or so the case method is a unique way to address their needs on administration. But we need to take time to reflect if the case method is still survivable. Right? Of course, the most strong rationale for the use of casebook may lie in the common law system itself, so which vastly rely on the case laws. So it is direct way to find the laws, and the rules found in case law may later be converted into kind of a restatement order. So there is also in the context of interplay in circular, as I've reiterated. The both ways will complement each other for better way of research and legal study. If you can make an assessment of the legal education system in England with the above materials, what might your main concerns be were you to be studying in England now instead of the United States? Would you in any way appear to be better off on the English system? And also the culture of bar association is interchangeable if you're qualified to sit bar exam in New York, if you complete a basic credit requirement in the common law education. The English system, next one, are the arguments against fusion persuasive to you, forgetting, if you can, your notions of its discriminatory aspects? The obstacles to becoming a lawyer the women encounter are not the patrimony of American women. Might there be more and more subtle obstacles in the English system? So how do you see this prejudice between male and female persons? The gender element may once influence the eligibility of a bar admission. And we also some kind of a confidential nature, and which could be properly called a closed system in English context. So the judicial post emanates some kind of a distinct conservative ethos in context. Many women choose the solicitor route because the barrister obstacles appear greater. Does this create an overlooked argument for fusion, that the divided profession functions in an unacceptably discriminatory manner by allowing women into profession, but by shunting them off to the solicitor side to preserve the maleness of the inns and bench? As gender suggests the apprenticeship system allows some control over numbers entering the profession, but also may be used to control who enters the profession. If one is to criticize the vocational training stage in England and the lack of such a stage in the United States, it is the bar practicing lawyers who must bear the criticism. In West Germany, control of the vocational stage and even the first referendum examinations at the end of one's academic training is formally lodged in course. Would the system function better in England or the United States if there were more governance by the courts? Or should the training be regulated by legislation on the basis that it is the public's interest to have better preparation of lawyers before they are admitted to practice? So it is a case by case in consideration. So the diversity of a legal education would be prominent, and we actual Koreans have mixed system previously about national bar exam, which does not require any educational undertaking. So it is open nationwide to widows of a citizen. That is not the case usually in Germany or France. It is distinctive also. And the next topic concerns a legal professions. So we are charged with a survey of three classes of professions in England. The civil law and socialist law systems offer, or rather demand from the law graduate, a choice from a wide list of legal professions than we think of in the common law systems. The reason principally is because we add the judiciary to the choices at time of qualification in civil and socialist systems. And we may also add the notary as a special profession. The notary as thicket of a historical background, and also now have unique sections of legal practice in continental states. The role is distinguished from normal area of just the business, and the public responsibility, however, is serious to govern, which symbolizes the centralization tendency of a continental states. And this profession, in the Korean context, merged by attorneys, qualified based on the Constitution and the pertinent statute. The choice in the common law systems is now whether to represent clients to be or to be a judge, or perhaps to be a notary. It is a single choice whom to represent. Will one be a private practitioner with a variety of clients, or house counsel representing a single, usually corporate client, or given choosing to represent the government by becoming a government lawyer? Which one should distinguish from being a lawyer in government? In contrast to the United States, England and several other common law nations have split the profession into those who deal directly with clients, the solicitors, and those who are called upon by solicitors to answer special legal questions, prepare papers, and most importantly, do the work of advocacy in higher courts, the barristers. We have seen that the split comes not at the time of entry into practice, but during the educational process. The choice once made is rarely reversed. It will require retraining in the vocational stage and fulfillment of the pupillage or article period. But that does not mean a person called to the bar as a barrister will be a practicing barrister. If he is successful at finding chambers, he will likely spend his life at the bar, unless he later moves on to the bench. But there are many who fulfill the requirements to practice, who finish the term of pupillage but cannot find chambers. They may become lawyers in government or assume a position such as a magistrate's court clerk. Others may be called to the bar but never practice. They may have sold the title of barrister for reasons of prestige and may enter law teaching, work in industry, or as in the case of the unsuccessful seeker of chambers above, take a position such as magistrate's court clerk. Thus many seek the title barrister who plan not to practice as barristers, either because it is doubtful they will be able to enter the small elite circle, or because they have a different career goal which being a barrister will promote. The title of solicitor is less prestigious. It tends not to be so unless it is to be used. It is difficult for the United States law student to realize how difficult and emotional this decision can be for an English student. The United States student graduating from law school and passing a bar is a lawyer. There is no further choice to be made, which in any way is as significant as the barrister solicitor decision. A United States graduate may choose to be a worst lawyer or a small town sole practitioner, a trial lawyer, or an office work lawyer, but he is still called lawyer. The English division raises one overriding question for the comparatist. Does the split profession lead to better delivery of legal services? That is a question to which we will return after reading about what solicitors and barristers do. So, it may be pure, which is not insightful in some sense, to bring our issues into one point of a legal service. The concept of legal service is usually preferred by the citizen of the United States, but do we solely attribute the legal professions in England in terms of service? They have rich traditions about oligarchy and some social prestige. So the sharing or perception of a basic equality in terms of a framework of society may well diminish in the context of England. But now we can see a social progress of vast areas in global jurisdictions. So the key to look into the nature of a dynamism would well be founded in service perception in carrying our legal business. And so then after a short break we'll be available of a further topics. Thank you for your attention. We'll see you soon.